Good morning and good night to anyone else around the world. Today's presentation is basically about CX within the community and how do we change the way we think today around customer experience and how do we drive innovation around Cognizant Softvision. My name is Mehdi Mostag. I've been a user experience designer for over 10 to 15 years in various agencies, private organizations, government organizations, and recently started working for Cognizant Softvision around maybe 6 to 12 months ago. Today's presentation, as we go through, there will be a number of slides. They'll be generally subjective. Some of them will be factual. And as we go through, it would be appreciated if all of you could participate and put your inputs in terms of your experiences. Doesn't have to be too detailed, but just a few words here and there in terms of how you feel about that particular scenario or situation. So let's begin. So challenging the ways we work within the CX community. Okay. Who we are. Who is Cognizant Softvision? Cognizant Softvision, a human-centered design culture. So we talk about a multidisciplinary guide, compromise of illustration, copywriting, service design, UX design, CX, digital experience, so forth. Designing digital products and services to delight end users, create memorable experiences for our clients' businesses. And our focus is first on building the right thing, then building it right, ensuring that we decouple between design and development. So essentially, this slide that we're discussing right now is just talking about us being a design agency, technology company, and various other products and services that we offer our clients. We'll go to the next one. That's just an overview. The importance of customer experience. What problems do we see? So how do we inspire adoption onto our digital platforms and reduce our attrition? Consumers are increasingly loyal to experiences and not brands. As competition increases, businesses focus and face even more pressure to create curated experiences that drive consumer engagement and differentiation in the market. Consumer expectations outpacing efforts to improve personalization of digital experience. So we talk about, for example, 91% more likely to shop with brands who recognize and remember those digital experiences. These are just basic facts as we warm up to get into the presentation. Over here, we talk about the implications of CX and UX. So we talk about, estimated $1.42 trillion, which is a massive amount of funds that have been spent approximately on bad customer experiences versus average. So when we talk about below average customer experiences versus above, you can see the figures there. We talk about $1.4 billion spent versus $572 million spent for retailers. So this example here is just discussing high level about, the cost to services and businesses when they do provide a below average customer experience versus a above the average. So, to determine that and the differences, it is borderline, but these figures are summed up in terms of industries as a whole. And then you can see that we talk about 79% of users who are dissatisfied and most likely not to purchase again. And then the spending ratio of 110 to 100, $1 on research, $10 to change the design, $100 to change in development. Kind of seems like, a big deal these days in terms of decisions that are made in regards to customer experience and how those decisions affect these clients of ours. So our approach to designing magnetic experiences. So empathetically, we place the customer at the center while remaining closely bound to the business's outcomes. Generally today, I think, a lot of businesses still revolve around, providing scope of works or detailed documentation around their requirements and how we deliver those solutions. But really, has the customer been in-depth research in terms of their, the empathy side? How are they dealing with that organization? What are their viewpoints of that organization? How are they going through the journey with that organization? Ensuring designers and researchers are focused on their craft and not distracted by operational overhead. Another interesting one, focused on our craft. Generally, we get pushed into a lot of, operational work, and which is great. But sometimes as designers and customer experience designers and UXers, we try to look at problems that are not obviously black and white. So those discovery sessions and how they're formed and how we get to start the process from the very beginning of a project are very crucial. Infusing intentionally into processes. So data-led reasoning behind our design decisions and how they influence product development. Another interesting one. And then we talk about establishing continuous learning UX culture as imperative to our alignment in terms of how we shift the customer's expectations. So as we go through this presentation, I'm going to show a few examples and a few mindsets of how, as an organization, we can go through and think about how to become an organization that is the forefront of customer experience. How can we lead with customer experience first at hand? And a lot of these slides will become more relevant as we go through. We'll go on to the next. So human-centric at the core. So these are just a few examples of the different channels, touch points, and so forth. So when we talk about omnichannel and so forth. So we talk about the goals, the time, the location, the mindset of the customer. So we're talking about the context, how we reach them. We talk about web, mobile, wearable, kiosk, smart TV, voice UI, etc. Then we talk about, the different touch points. Some of these may be relevant to B2B markets, some of them may be relevant to B2C. But at the moment, there are a lot of touch points these days that do overlap and do affect the customer experience, whether it be the journey that's being mapped out needs to include all of these, whether the products are similar, whether they're different depending on the touch point or the channel, are all very crucial to the success of the overall brand's perception to the customer. So solution. So we talk about empowering, performance, convenience, relevance. And then we talk about platforms. So we talk about, consistency, flexibility. Is it personal? Do I get something out of this in terms of education and learning? Is it even measurable? So can we, develop this further on after our learning experiences, after data, after analytics, so forth? And then we talk about the backbone. So in regards to the backbone, we talk about, basically customers, the research, the data, the patterns, the experiments that we do, the things that we validate, and the tools that we use day to day. Go on the next one. So just to show you how important customer experience is at the moment. So we're talking about businesses that are focused on keeping customers happy. So today, the mindset for most organizations around the world, and it's been noticed, like you talk about customer experience, you talk about pricing, you talk about product, and what is the priority at the moment? Product is very important. Obviously, you got to deliver a great product in order to have a great solution, and our clients already have that. So what do we deliver for our clients at the moment? What is our point of difference with other organizations? What are we actually doing here? So pricing, we don't, get involved with, so that's not in our domain. So what is the next most important category? So out of the 1,920 business professionals that were interviewed, the number one priority for the next 5 years was customer experience. We're talking about 45.9% of those people that were interviewed. So we're talking over 900 people within that small testing group that basically verified that customer experience is going to be the next big thing, I guess. How do we solve it? How do we approach it? How do we become innovative? I guess those are the questions that are going to come through as we discuss, as we go through this presentation. So next slide, we talk about, businesses that are focused on keeping customers happy. So customer experience will overtake price and products. So we just described that in the previous slide. And as you can see here, price and product versus customer experience and balancing the scales. So 86% of customers will pay for a better customer experience rather than worrying about the price of product. So, what are your priorities? Is it the price, is it the product, or is it the experience? And obviously it depends from industry to industry, but I think at the moment, depending on the industry or even the vertical, it really does not matter. It kind of seems like a common factor at this time and point, especially in 2021, with all the technology that we have available to us and all the touch points. Go on. So here we talk about one of the biggest influences in our generation knew the importance of customer experience over technology-led choices. So as you can see here, the video is about Steve Jobs and customer experience, and it was filmed in 1997. Now, Steve Jobs was a pioneer, obviously, an innovative pioneer. And the video, basically, if you have not already seen it, describes, not only the importance of customer experience, but why he led towards CX over technology. So there's a few people within the audience that question him about Java-led responses and technical responses, and how do we go through, looking at certain aspects of technology, and how's Apple going to approach this, solving this problem? So he deviated from the question and talked around it and basically discussed, look, at the end of the day, whatever Apple becomes in the future, it will become a company that's around the customer. What that forms into and how it becomes, in the eyes of the public in the future is going to be, completely up to the customer and how they see that. But if you look at Apple today, their success is still, there even with Steve Jobs obviously not around. So he led the platform, he led the vision, and he delivered products that people wanted, not what businesses thought that they wanted. So if you have time, go on YouTube, definitely go have a look at that because it's a great video. It only goes for 3 minutes, so just listen to what he had to say. So we talk about here at the moment, we talk about, CX that transforms the way we think about our clients and ultimately their customers. So we'll get started. Okay. Customer experiences that transform the way we think about our clients and ultimately the customers. So we talk about design, we talk about challenge, we talk about high value, and we talk about technology agnostic experiences. So at the moment, designing customer experience philosophies that matter within a dedicated team. So what we're talking about here, and we're going to go through a few examples, is how could Cognizant Softvision become an organization that actually looks at, developing dedicated teams with different areas of expertise that actually go through the customer journeys firsthand with our clients? How do we look at different ways of creating, an art and not just a science, and going through that actual process of understanding the real pain points and problems that have been addressed to us, and not always by, a scope of work or a business case or etc. So when we talk about challenge, we talk about the ways that our clients interact with their customers and what challenges do we face, and what do we do to challenge our clients? How do we challenge them to say, this is the way that we should be looking at it? Maybe we can do it X way or Z way or Y way. It doesn't really matter. At the point of the time, it's more about the first steps of just realizing how we can actually approach and solve problems differently. Also proactively, I guess, rather than being reactive. So when we're going to talk about high value, so we're developing high value interactions. Yes, we talk about UX, we talk about CX, we talk about DX, we talk about, the importance of the technical teams being involved with the design teams, and how do we develop not just digital solutions, but any form of solutions that interact with the digital solutions that we actually do provide. And technology agnostic, we all know this and we all talk about it a lot. And it's a big topic in terms of technology stacks that are being implemented within organizations and embedded versus how do we design solutions and then think about the technology that is needed in order to deliver that solution. I think it's a big topic, and I think a lot of people will be familiar with it. There have been a lot of projects that you've all probably worked on in the past where you've been defined based on a business case, a particular scope of work, and a tech stack. And this is what we have to work with, and this is what we deliver. And we do the best we can, but how do we think differently? How do we think to solve this before even going into those minor details? Okay, so design thinking. We have a little overview of design thinking and doing. Obviously, we have understand, define, you validate, you mock up, you test, you prototype, multiple iterations, test again, you develop, you launch an MVP for a product, and then you measure. So we talk about, research on the business that uses the context. We talk about define, we talk about transition from identifying problems to creating solutions. Talk about diverging. And then we talk about testing diverging ideas into, to build trust with stakeholders, essentially. Talk about transitioning from identifying problems to creating solutions. And then we validate those solution ideas with other stakeholders. We go through and then we start to converge. And then when we converge, we talk about atomic UI design, hi-fi mockups, designs, prototypes, etc. So I guess how this comes into play is more about the process of design thinking, how it's actually implemented. But yet again, we go back to the original problems, like when we design a product or a solution, are we actually designing the correct product? Has this been, investigated further? Have we tested the marketplace before we've actually even really tested the marketplace, etc.? So then we go into usability tests with real users and stakeholders. So the centralized findings to decide on the next steps. Prototype, we're talking about using, RAD processes, one of the best methods of gaining design insights early. And then we talk about validated assumptions and user testing grounded behavioral observations. Then we talk about develop. So how do we materialize those experiences? How do we create, centralized product teams? How do we unify the methodologies around those product teams? And I think we've done a great job with that actually over the last few years, even before I joined. The benefit of MVP and then looking to build the simplest product that you can and test quickly. So we all know about that. That's more about around the development cycle, but obviously, iterations and testing and validating small portions of work still can be defined by small portions of customer experiences, like that specific user journey, and that user journey that gets translated into a user story and then a product feature and a backlog, that component, how far into development will we go into and how much money and time will be invested before we can validate that idea or test it with our customers or our customers, our clients' customers, etc. And then we talk about measurement. So we talk about, UX improvements, benefit to the business and the goals, KPIs, how are they measured these days? In regard to KPIs, we talk about a lot of black and white measurements. We talk about a lot of return on investment. We talk about conversion rates, but, are we measuring customer experience? How do you measure customer experience? Is it the empathy part? Is it the personality? Is it the direct feedback? Is it the signals that are in between that we cannot measure at the moment? Is it the retention, which is a good indicator usually, but it's not the only indicator. We'll go through here. So starting with design thinking, we talk about, creating dedicated teams to experience firsthand our clients' service, customer, and user experience models. So what does that mean essentially? I guess it means, you have so many talented people within Cognizant Softvision, in different areas that are all customers in the real world, regardless of the brand or the organization or the private, public sector. It doesn't really matter. And, how do we bridge that gap between working for our clients and then being their actual customers in the real world scenario? So for example, just thinking out loud here, obviously, but we talk about, UX designers joining with customer experience guys, the technical, teams with all the developers, the business analysts, there are a lot of different roles within the technical teams that could go and actually experience a client's products and services firsthand. And sometimes I feel, it could be discoverable rather than led by the business. So this is what we're talking about, the balance between these two. And when we look at in-house versus outsourcing, that is more in relation to, a product definition or a problem statement being handed over to Cognizant Softvision rather than going and discovering the problem statement and handing it back to the client and presenting something that they never actually come across before. It's a great way of getting new business. It's a great way of being, forward thinking. It's a great way of, leading into the future. So most organizations will obviously, tender for most projects, but imagine that tender being in reverse, right? Where we would create the tender. The next one, we talk about getting into our client's shoes to better understand the customer's pain points. So we talk about how do we put ourselves in the mindset of a real world customer with real world services. So we talk about, the problems and scenarios that would enable us to prosper beyond insights that can only be measured. How do we put ourselves in their shoes? Generally, a lot of people think about this differently, but a problem statement at a very high level could always be given. And then, as professionals and tech leaders, we can go in and experience these firsthand. And we'll discuss a lot more about this as we go through, but you can see that, a lot of people are going to have different visions and different viewpoints depending on the brands that they love, and, would have had their own experiences during that timeline in terms of what they could have added value to, but were not part of the actual business process or product team because they work for a completely different organization. Another interesting one we talk about here, I'll give you guys a little bit of a challenge, but generally we talk about creating frameworks and partnerships that allow our clients' customers to keep up with real-time change. It's a very complex one. I think at the moment, design frameworks with business frameworks and methodologies of how we enable them to create the correct partnerships with other organizations, but create a continuous user journey or customer journey that's actually sound. So I'll give you one example and then maybe give you a challenge on the 6 logos that you can see here in the brands. But generally, for example, let's say you purchase a ticket from Qantas and it costs, $2,000 to $3,000. We know it's very expensive. The margins are there. So why doesn't Qantas, create an app and do a partnership with Uber to give you, airport transfers from home to the hotel and back from your return trips? Why aren't you getting, vouchers with either McDonald's or Subway or another brand where you can get your food paid for at the food court before you get on the plane? What about subscriptions to, even like Netflix, where you're on the plane and you're watching, movies, etc. Starbucks get free coffee as well. And I mean, the cost to them is very minimal in relation to the cost of the product. And then, that user journey being created as a unified app where, you're not doing anything. It's seamless. You're just pushing a few buttons, the digital vouchers in, it's connecting to all the different systems. All of these brands are getting new clients. So yeah, have a think about that one in terms of looking at those 6 brands that are completely different industries, but yet how could you connect that into a single user journey or a customer journey? So, we look at that and then we talk about how do we come up with innovative solutions that also provide new partnerships. So this one's a very good one. I think if anyone can comment in the chat or post anything up in terms of just any example. So it could be something, for example, like you get a Shell gift card because you're driving, or you're getting, something from Target. I mean, these are very hard, but the one that I gave example with the Uber and Qantas and McDonald's, that's, it's another example. We'll move on. So challenge. Role-playing as a customer will teach you many insights that data or scope of work alone will never provide. So have any of you ever experienced a terrible customer experience, like a really bad customer experience? Yeah, and generally it usually happens with it's still public facing and B2C, but it's more of the B2B side of the businesses. Maybe it might be like insurers, where it's the complexity, or banking or something like that. And then you identify what could be improved purely because you're an expert in that field. So you're like a web developer, an iOS developer, an Android developer, and you're using the app and you're looking at the product and you're just saying, well, why is it lagging? Oh, the server response is not there. Or your UX designer saying this button is too small. I mean, these are the, minute details, but then, you can still look at it from the service design level, look at, why didn't they give me an automated call, or phone call back, or digital response, or chatbot to this, particular question? Why didn't they create an AI bot for this? Why am I waiting on the phone for 30 to 40 minutes? So there's things like that. So if you've ever had, a terrible customer experience, and you thought that you could purely improve it because you're a subject matter expert in that field, I'm sure some of you would have come across that in your time. Post an example. Feel free to do so. Don't be shy. Just post it in the chat. Helps the rest of us revert back and have a think about the contextual understanding of these real world problems, rather than just the the data. We'll move on. So how do we experience the journey firsthand on both ends of the spectrum? We talk about in order to better understand needs and wants rather than relying on data. It's a very interesting one. So I'll try to give an example. Right here we have an illustration of Qantas. So, you could be a pilot that worked for Qantas for 20 years and never physically flown in, either business or economy. It doesn't really matter, but you never were actually a customer. So you were an internal employee. You understood everything about the organization. You understand everything they did and how they did it and why they did it, but you didn't experience it firsthand. So I'll try to give you that example and have a think about it. It can also work vice versa as well, which we will go through, I think, shortly. But let's say, for example, the pilot, it's in reverse. You were a customer of Qantas a long time and then you became a pilot. And then you see in reverse how it differentiates between being a customer and being, a subject matter expert of the organization, essentially. So if anyone's had an experience like that, it'd be very few, but, you could have, for example, worked at McDonald's and then used their products and services later and thought maybe they should do this better or that better, for example. Now we talk about business initiatives versus experience-led initiatives. So what is that essentially? I think I touched on it before. So we're talking about an organization that comes, like I said, with a business case or a scope of work or a problem statement that they've identified based on their research, or an understanding of what they need to do internally and make that public facing and solve that issue, whether it be monetary or customer experience, or any other form of KPI that they may be measuring or trying to gain upon. So business initiatives versus customer experience led, what is the difference? I think at the end of the day, when we talk about going into an organization and being part of that organization and understanding how they work and how they live, but still being a subject matter expert and still having experience across many other organizations that we've worked across, how do we improve the life of the customer and then work backwards to work out what the requirements that need to be delivered or driven to make the project a success? So by all means, obviously, there are always going to be limitations with technology, but we try to, like we talked about, try to be technology agnostic and go through that process of understanding the real problems that seem to exist. How can we be a differentiator between ourselves and other consulting companies around the world? So how many times do we jump into a project working blindly? So as you can see, there's an illustration of a man with glasses on, and obviously he's blind, before actually defining the source of truth to the problem. So how many times have we worked on a project and we have, probably about 75% through, and then we realize, is this actually really solving the problem once it's tested in the market or not? And that's nobody's fault. We always have to have initiatives, regardless if they're correct or not. So we always know with startups that the customer is key. They are the key to the success of the organization. So we talk about high value. Another interesting one here. So when we talk about high value, how do we create things of high value? So right now we're looking at something creating unique, but however yet memorable. I think there have been a lot of experiences. I don't know if you could all remember the top of your head. If you have any, please post in the chat as well. Something really simple, but yet just really, made your day. And it didn't need to be very costly. It didn't need to be expensive. It didn't need to be ultra complex. It was just something that, just was thoughtful. So you see a lot of startups these days that have less restrictions, less loopholes, less gates to, open, and they generally are able to create memorable experiences without these hurdles and limitations. So, emotion for most of us, well, for all of us, I guess, is, a big part of our lives, regardless if it's, in retail or it's someone you love or, general everyday living. Anything that can stoke an emotion will stoke spark a memory, and that is a lot more meaningful to a customer or understanding, and it's more meaningful long term than something that's just solving a basic problem. So if any of you do have anything that you can remember that, even in its basic form, was very, you know, memorable, I guess, because yeah, I've had a few, and I just remember that, sometimes it's not always about the big dollars and the big technology and all of that. So how do we incorporate that? How do we make our customers not forget our clients' brands? So I think it's a very important one in customer experience. So here we talk about inflection points throughout the existing or evenly newly created customer experiences. So how do we spot these and what do we do about it? So once we understand what we need to create, we create it, and then we test it, we iterate, we go through these journeys, and then we talk about, what is not working at the moment. There's obviously existing projects that we can go and discover these inflection points in the customer service journeys and develop new products and services for our clients and new projects. And then there are others that are just purely fresh from the beginning. So I think, it's a big part of CX to make sure that we map out these customer journeys across all these multiple channels and really work out methodologies and processes around what are the inflection points in those customer journeys. Sometimes they're hard to see and sometimes they're very obvious, but most of them are hard to spot, just like a virus, as you can see in this illustration. So how do we have new ways of working to be able to spot those inflection points, point them out to our customers, and get new business and basically justify the reasoning behind it? So now we talk about value is not always monetary, however, can be very profitable for our clients, both directly and indirectly long term. That's very true. So we talked about memorable experience, we talked about a few other things. So basically, money is not always the key indicator to performance. And unfortunately, in the business world, we understand that, you need to show KPIs around return on investments, and it's got to, be legitimate, it's got to be viable, and there's got to be a reason to keep the program of work going on and on. But at the same time, how do we deliver, new KPIs and new understandings of how customers are feeling around the brands that we deliver technology for, how they perceive that brand? So it's not always going to be monetary. I don't think it will be in the future. I think, when product and pricing becomes, pretty much second level to customer experience, we will see a shift. So we talk about success can be measured beyond return on investment. So why don't we measure people's emotional responses? And I think sometimes, people are forced to purchase products because of product lines, or, they just have so much exposure to that particular market or country within or area. So yeah, it's not always about money. We talk about technology agnostic. So how we translate these experiences into meaningful digital products for multiple people or personas? How do we, get into this? Because it's a very touchy subject in terms of technology stacks that are always provided to us, but yet we talk about being technology agnostic. How can we solve problems without looking at the technology? How do we deliver new solutions without worrying about the technology? And I know that, 95% of you have worked in a project where the technology has dictated the scope and the outcomes of the product backlog and the experience ultimately, rather than the other way around. And some people may turn around and say that's a little bit airy-fairy, you got to be a bit more realistic about it. But generally, I think, the limitations of what the technology stack bring in make a big difference. If we solve the problem and have an understanding of how we can achieve to solve that problem, if the technology gets in the way, then of course we'll have to have a rethink about how we can deliver it. There were some good cases that we worked on with a few insurers. several months back where we created solutions that actually solved problems for the customer, where they were able to basically use automated services and responses in times of empathy and need, and just didn't want to be stuck on the computer or the phone for a very long time while claiming an insurance policy. But sometimes our clients turn around and say, can you please redevelop this .NET application and create us a web form? I mean, everything these days is a web form. We understand we need to capture data on the web, but really, like, what do people want? That's our difference, right? Like, what's the differentiation between Cognizant Softvision and the other consulting companies? What can we present to our clients that they never saw before? What success metrics can we create that never were nearly created before, but then present back to our clients as success factors, essentially, which will ultimately create better user experiences and be happier for everyone all around. So yes, we do need to stop thinking about the tech and start thinking about the customer's personalities, which will define their needs. So another example of technology agnostic, we talk about, basically development teams that have an invested interest in our clients' real world experiences. So we need to get the tech teams out there. We need to get them more involved with design teams. We need to get the tech teams involved in the customer journeys and understanding of the first-hand experience, not only to help us deliver better technical solutions. Well, obviously you guys are the SMEs and what the possibilities are, but just to understand both ends of the spectrum. It really does connect the dots in terms of the experience, digitally, obviously online, but even the real world experiences. When we talk about that, I mean other channels or, like traditional channels that, are not necessarily digital, that do connect to digital channels. So tech experts can become the customer. And what more could you ask for in terms of bridging the gap between the customer and the technology feasibility? So I'm sure you had example of projects where maybe or may not have used that product or service before the client has become a customer of ours, and you've developed a web application or a mobile app, and because you had a better understanding of that application and you've used their products and services, you're actually invested in that project a lot further. You actually delivered something a lot more concise and helped the design teams even come up with a better product than they originally had because you had SME knowledge as a customer, I guess, beforehand. So if anyone's had within the development community, that's been through this particular experience and gone and worked for a particular organization, and later it has become, either on the client side or agency side where they've developed work for them and actually coded something specifically for that particular brand, it'd be good for someone to provide a few examples of how they benefited the project. It doesn't have to be too detailed. It could be something as simple as a one-liner. So as we go through, still on technology agnostic, we talk about, being seen as an organization that is at the forefront of customer experience and will give us the edge over our competitors. Obviously, the illustration we look at here, we're all in the same boat. I think, if we all think the same way and we approach things the same way from the customer experience perspective, and there's a lot of learnings that can be overlapped between technical teams and design teams and administration teams and management teams in terms of how we approach it as a methodology, as an approach, and experiment a little and become a little bit different to the other consulting groups, that have come through. And I understand that, a lot of organizations are leading by customer experience and have workshops and go through this process, but it's all about how we're solving the problem initially. So if we become the customer, then we'll know how to satisfy other customers who are in the same scenario. So now we talk about customer-centric organizations. So this is a perfect example of the difference between a partial and a full end-to-end customer experience. So we all 100% of you will be aware of Pizza Hut and Domino's, obviously, unless you don't like pizza. But generally, yeah, Pizza Hut and Domino's, I think, was a good example that I want to bring up about how Domino's is a technology-led company that is at the forefront of technology, and then decided to provide a product or service, which is ultimately the pizza itself. But the two go hand in hand. Whereas Pizza Hut have a great product, have a great pricing, but their exposure over the last maybe 5-10 years, well, I feel, I'm not sure about the States, but in Australia, has died. So Domino's is starting to, really take over in that space because of the innovative solutions that they came up with. So they, pizza tracker and, GPS real-time timing, and, video, real-time video streams of your pizza being cooked, and, picking up your pizza in the car park, and, toppings on your own pizza and a customization. And they go on and on. And then you can see here, like 70% of their sales are made through digital, which is amazing. So I could only think that maybe, a portion of that was obviously either on the phone or in store was the rest. But everyone is using a digital device these days to do something, to order food, whether it be like Uber Eats, menu log, etc. Like everyone's using a digital device. So yeah, I wanted to discuss these. If anyone's got any comments on, how they feel about the difference between Domino's and Pizza Hut, and which brand do they prefer to use, whether it be from the product side or from the digital side. So personally, for me, it's a funny one. I actually like Pizza Hut more than I do Domino's in terms of the product, but the experience of Domino's has led me to use Domino's because it's just a lot better experience. So you decide. Let's go for another one here. Pain points for hailing a cab. Maybe I could probably remember, I don't exactly know the year that Uber initiated, but it feels like a very long time ago, but actually it wasn't. It probably would have been like 6-7 years ago or something like that. So pretty much, no more painstaking anticipation or waiting for your cab because you know exactly where your ride is at any time. So that's exactly right. I mean, mobile devices were around for a long time, mobile apps were around for a long time, but then the idea of ride sharing and understanding of like, how do we create a business process or a customer experience that enables people to have the freedom of choice and the availability of being able to get to the place they want to get to immediately and know where they're at any single point in time, is the huge difference between the success of Uber versus obviously traditional taxis. So traditional taxis, we talk about being everywhere. So, convenience, yes, if you're in the city, but if you're in regional or suburban areas, you're not going to be able to catch a cab. So that customer experience point where they created a product and application that allowed people to have flexibility. I mean, the business operations of creating essentially, drivers and setting it up, and, that's not the hard part. The hard part was actually finding the pain points of what people actually wanted and validating that idea. And, generally in most cases, it was all about, Uber was definitely safer, more informed, better time management. You could share the costs, and definitely more cost effective than the regular taxi industry. So a huge disruption to the transport industry in regards to, taxis and rideshare, and have become, at the forefront. Such a simple idea, such a simple concept, but what were they solving? They were solving the customer experience problem. And that's why they became successful. We're going to go through another one. So, basically we talk about, not adapting to change. We can see here that, the good old VHS tape back in the days of Blockbuster, and how we all used to travel to the video store and, look at each shelf, and the guy next to you, he would grab it about 3 minutes, 3 seconds before you did. And then you give him a look like, oh, it's the last one, there's no more rentals. So, with the static approach that they had, because it was a physical device, and how technology has taken over. And now we talk about how Netflix changed the video industry and put Blockbuster out of business. Not a complex idea, but it was more about how to satisfy the customer problem, the real problem. And the real problem was technology was changing. People were adapting. People didn't want to leave their homes, but they wanted to have multiple devices and multiple touch points and privacy and quality and convenience of their own, household to be able to watch quality entertainment. And as time went on, obviously, they had a much better, I guess, like product offering than they did initially. Whether we go with series and movies and, etc. So, they've done very well. So you can see here that Netflix is, from 21.5 million, they've gone to over 158 million paid memberships, which is absolutely insane. So just showing you that time and adoption, whilst having a good product and customer experience and rapid testing and good technology, leads to a success of any business or venture. I think I'll finish off on that, and just if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free. Thank you.